bond program. So just to give some information, there's 77 bridges in Norman. 10 of those bridges are at risk of becoming structurally deficient. 5 bridges are structurally deficient. 12 bridges are functionally obsolete, and 6 bridges have load postings of less than 23 tons. And so this program, they're estimating about $40 to $50 million over a 10-year construction program. So far, staff has identified 20 locations. 11 of those locations are going to be major rehabs or repairs, and 9 of those locations are going to be bridge replacements. And so with this slide, we're looking to council to see if you want to give direction, if we want to go with the bond referendum, and if so, when and for how much.
Well, I thought with my last question was, are there any like imhoff bridge situations we can head off with a smaller amount without trying to fund the 40 to 50 million? And if so, I'd like to know about it. And then with the referendum, I certainly support it. I think we've shown how successful our street maintenance bond is. And I mean, just read the bullet points. We obviously need this. My biggest hang up is we also need a stormwater utility. And I don't know how we decide which one is most imperative and when we roll it out, because we're doing a water rate increase April 5th. So I don't think we're ever asking taxpayers for things that we don't need. And we've done a good job of, I think, explaining needs and showing past successes and promises fulfilled, but we do need to be mindful of the timing of it, that it's rolled out. That's my thoughts on that at this moment. Councilmember Hall?
I think it's first.
Councilmember Holman?
I agree. I don't think this is something the general fund will ever be able to address by itself. And unless there's some sort of federal grant program that comes along that will help do this, I don't see any other way to address this problem, just given how many of them there are and how much it costs without some sort of voter-approved bond. I mean, unless somebody else knows of another way, that seems like the way. And when to do it, I agree there's never a good time, I don't think, to ask for anything. But you know, it's just going to get more, like all these other things, more and more expensive, millions of dollars more expensive every year that we don't. So, I mean, I would encourage us to consider within the next year or two that we have some sort of bridge program. Maybe it's not $50 million worth, but maybe it's something.
I lean towards bridge maintenance before stormwater, because this is kind of spelled out. We have a model for the street maintenance, and stormwater still has a lot of work.
And that being a utility that has to be created, and then rates that have to be set and monthly. I mean, this, I think, would be much easier to get through and get voters to support.
Catherine, do you happen to know, when will we know what our potential ballot dates are for 2022-23?
We have them for 2022. I have to look and see if they've released 2023 yet. It should be back.
It may help just if council knew what all of your options were, and we knew we lost a handful this time around. So we'll bring that to you as soon as we get those dates in print.
I would think 23 would be the earliest. Councilmember Hall and then Councilmember Schuler.
Yeah, I really just agree with a lot of what you both said. I think, we've seen the direct result of not being able to maintain at least one bridge, the Imhoff Bridge, and what that is costing us as a community and, inconvenience, etc. So to me, again, unless we can find alternate sources of funding, we can keep spending that infrastructure money that we don't know how much it is or when we get it. We can spend that 20 times over. But it just seems like we need to be intentional about how we proceed with something like this. And this seems like certainly the way right now to go forward unless there's, additional information. So I think we definitely need to keep it under consideration. I think with stormwater, hopefully we're going to be able to address some capital projects from ARPA or infrastructure money. We don't really have much definition about that quite yet either, do we?
Yeah. We don't, but it's in there.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that in the capital project category that we're going to be able to address some of those needs. We already have some ARPA money that we still are thinking might be able to address a stormwater capital project or not. And I think, we've certainly demonstrated to the community the success of our long-term street maintenance bond program. And this, to me, kind of fits into that same category. So, whether we go big or go home, or at least start, I think we definitely ought to consider this.
In terms of starting, to get something on there, I'd be curious to know the ones that, like, functionally obsolete. How much are those bridges?
Yeah.
Let's start with those. And obviously, so that's how I don't think,
Appreciate
we
that.
don't know if we go for the full 40 to 50, but we take a bite out of it.
Appreciate that. Mary, I've just mentioned that our staff has done a great job, and everyone here, packaging this up for you with lots of details, lots of options. You all just approved an engineering contract recently to help us do that. So in the next 60 days, we're going to have a lot more information for you to chew on and think about, and where you want the project and the program to be. So really good hard numbers, good estimates, and we'll be able to do all the work with that money if you choose to go that scale.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Schuler?
Yeah, my thoughts are centered around kind of a lot of what you all have been saying. And I was going to ask, just kind of for the record, the difference between doing something like a bridge maintenance bond program as opposed to doing a stormwater utility, because they're very different. But, Councilmember Holman started down that line of kind of understanding. And so while, in Ward 2, stormwater is such a big infrastructure need. And I would also say that, the Imhoff Bridge was also coupled with a stormwater issue. And so I'm wondering how many of our bridges are like that, where stormwater is connected to what's happening with our bridges. Do we have any data on that? Is there? Have you done any of that?
Look, I'll bet half of the 20 that we've identified are bridges over channels, over streams and channels. And so certainly stormwater is a huge issue. And, even in the previous stormwater bond and utility discussions and elections, there was this crossover between bridges and stormwater. We're a little bit of an identity crisis here, to be honest with you. There's so many needs. There just was never enough funding to do it all. But yes, easily half of these are stormwater related.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if there's some way to think outside the box. I think staff is so good at finding different sources of money to do projects that are bigger, or coupling them and being strategic about we're doing this as a stormwater but also a bridge program. So I'm wondering if there's opportunities to kind of couple some of them with stormwater and kind of take chunks out of some of our larger things. But I agree, I think that this is more doable and more packageable for our community at this moment. But I hate to say that because I think stormwater is such a critical need.
And it is. I just
you
think
know.
we'll have to take our
Yeah,
due diligence
absolutely.
and plenty of time, and I think it'll take well over a year, so I'm fine with moving forward on one that's a lot more cut and dry.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilor
So,
Roll.
well, here's just another thought to add to the conversation. So I still haven't gotten over that we have not been successful in passing our stormwater utility, but I really haven't gotten over that we didn't get the bond, the capital project piece for stormwater over the finish line. Would it be possible, since there is some overlap here, if we're not gonna talk about the utility just yet, could we do a stormwater capital bond proposal as well at the same time, maybe?
Potential, Mr. Francisco, if we think about a question, or maybe, I'm kind of feeling like it could be a question that included a list of projects, and maybe it's your, 5 bridges that are structurally, deficient today, and it's the first 5 stormwater capital projects that we know we already had on the list ready to go, and that was a $25 million question. Does that sound like it could be done in a single question?
Yes, it could be done, and we would rely on the engineers to tell us what are the, for lack of a better term, pure stormwater projects. But just remember that a pure stormwater project is not a public utility. So it would require a 60% vote, or it would require that section of the state constitution that is for economic development projects, the 10 mil cap. So yes, it could be done, but there's a lot of other considerations to be made.
What about the argument that having a city that doesn't flood is good for economic
That's
development?
true.
Bridges will wash out.
Bridges don't wash out.
Yeah, and again, see, just remember that, Havenbrook wasn't an emergency until it failed. Imhoff wasn't an emergency until it failed. These bridges that are identified as structurally deficient are not an emergency until they fail, but we know that there's a problem out there.
Which
And so,
I was kind of lawyering the whole economic development thing, but now still wearing my lawyer hat. What kind of liability do we have now that we know there's something not great about them should something happen?
I'm not touching that.
Holiday Inn Express last night. I don't worry too much about that. Obviously, if it's so dangerous, we would close it down like we did in Hoff. There's a lot of limitations to liability for the city under the Governmental Tort Claims Act. So I don't think that's our biggest issue. But certainly, if we see one that's imminently dangerous, we should shut it down. Not for liability issues, even just for public safety issues.
How often are we monitoring that then?
So appreciate that answer from Catherine. I promise you, if there were any of these that were dangerous, I've heard that term, it's just not true, then we'd be closing it
Okay.
down. We are monitoring many of these structurally deficient functional fleet multiple times per year. Very formally, every 2 years, we do an evaluation of every structure in there, so we know where we are. We know what's happening. Anthony's right. These failures of the bridges were instantaneous. Many of them came in a flash flood, frankly. Main Street, flash flood. Imhoff, flash flood. Havenbrook, different story, but anyway. So after a flash flood, you're out there inspecting them. So never say never, but these are still safe to drive on. If they weren't, we'd be out there closing them.
Thank you.
So
Councilmember Hall.
is the proposed bridge maintenance bond program, is that a simple majority? Simple majority vote?
A bridge project is a
Okay,
public utility.
but not a stormwater
Not a
capital?
stormwater.
Okay, I didn't understand.
Stormwater is not a public utility. That's what I'm hearing.
That's correct. A pure stormwater project is not a public utility.
That gives me heartburn.
City of Tulsa probably feels differently about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
So moving on to the city fleet fueling facility, just some little bit of background on this. It was built in 1998. It holds 10,000 gallons of diesel and 10,000 gallons of unleaded, and it dispenses about 500,000 gallons of fuel annually to over 793 city vehicles and equipment. And so some of the challenges with the current facility are the fuel line encasements have failed, allowing groundwater to lay on top of the pumps. Critical repairs are needed in the next 3 years and are estimated at $350,000 to $500,000. Alternative fuels such as ethanol and biodiesel are not available due to the lack of tanks. There's limited tank storage capacity for our growing city fleet. We have no option for bulk diesel exhaust fluid. The fuel islands are deteriorating, and that replacement cost for this facility is estimated at $1,650,000. So this is the Odot Projects along State Highway 9. We have currently completed phases 1, 2, and 3, and we are currently in phase 4 of this, and that is from 72nd Street Avenue East to 108th. Reading that right? Yeah, 108th Avenue East. This has a budget of $16 million, and the construction began in August of 2021, and the construction completion is going to be around August of 2022. And after that, we still have 3 more phases along Highway 9 to complete.
But it looks like that's not till 2025 for the next one. Because I'd love to give Highway 9 a break after
Yeah.
this.
Yes.
Okay.
That's just
Councilmember Holman?
But the big one on there is the 6 lanes of Highway 9 from I-35 to East 24th. That's gonna, I mean, that's been on this map for a couple of years now that I've been following it, but that's a pretty major project through Wards 2 and 7 and 1 and 5. And
Councilor
6
Schuler?
lanes is a big deal. And people always complain about the, Chris Plank every morning on Sports Talk, is always talking about the lights on Highway 9, how he's always getting stuck. And so, yeah, that's a big one that we all need to keep thinking about.
Speaking of that, is there, with these projects, is there any talk about like reconfiguring traffic at Imhoff and Highway 9? Because I keep hearing about that.
Did you laugh just?
I'm not hearing it. Again, I'll remind you, this is a state highway.
I
This is not a
understand.
city.
I know. I just
Sorry
want to get it
about
on the
that.
record.
Well, we get the question all the time. The city needs to do this. None of this is city
Yeah.
of Norman. We're very grateful to our DOT partners who have spent $100 million plus here. I've not heard that, Council. We're happy to follow up. Now we do manage the traffic signal systems. Those are city-owned systems, but we don't manage the pavement. We don't control the traffic. We certainly don't control any changes to the highway. We can always ask.
I just hear a lot about how dangerous that intersection
I understand.
is.
Kind of the odd angle there. Sure.
It's unfunded, so I guess that's probably 10 years at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, the state has the same challenges that we're facing, but they're also getting lots of new federal funds, and so maybe they'll decide to change their plan. They have an 8-year plan, so they're having these kind of meetings for 8 years of highway projects all over the state of Oklahoma. These are, among that list. But no, the urban section, the 6 laning of that portion has been on the list for probably 2 decades, knowing that we're growing and eventually we're going to need to do something there. I think it is starting to approach more of a critical need.
Thank you.
So this next slide is over Norman's surface transportation program and surface transportation block grant program funding. So in fiscal year 22, for example, we were able to secure $11 million, and in fiscal year 23, we were able to secure about $2.9 million. And in the yellow on the right, for fiscal year 24, that is an estimate. So far we haven't secured those, but that is estimated at about $9.9 million from those programs.
Excellent. Councilman Peacock?
Just to clarify, the bars in red are locked in
Yes.
dollars. Okay. Thank you.
Nice recovery.
So this is a slide on our city vehicle replacement program. So these numbers and the correlation with the units can kind of change just depending on what specifically we're buying. And in fiscal year ending 2021, we spent $2,147,000 on 27 units, and in fiscal year ending 22, we're spending $2,179,000 on 34 units for that program. These are the proposed recurring sidewalk projects for fiscal year ending 23. The first one is the sidewalk program for schools and arterials, and that'll be at Stubman Avenue Phase 2 from Timberwolf Trail to Rock Creek Road. The sidewalk accessibility project from Cherry Creek Drive to Western View Drive. The citywide sidewalk project, which is our 50-50 matching program. We have the downtown area sidewalk project, and that's going to be on Webster Street from Tonhawa Street to Gray Street and Comanche Street from Miller to Porter Avenue. We have the sidewalks and trails, which will be on Alameda Street from Classen Boulevard to 12th Avenue Northwest, and the horizontal saw cut program, which will be on Tecumseh and Rock Creek Road from 36th Avenue Northwest to 48th Avenue Northwest, and the collector streets between those. So total, these are $420,000 in recurring sidewalk projects.
I'm a big fan of sidewalks. Big fan of
Radical.
One we can all
sidewalks.
agree on.
radical sidewalks.
All right, so these are some proposed recurring projects in the capital fund. We have the capital outlay, which is 27% of our capital sales tax. That's at $3,844,000. We have $2,305,000 in street maintenance projects. We have $285,000 in maintenance of existing facilities. About $1.2 million in stormwater drainage maintenance. We have about 1.4 million in personnel costs. We have 100,000 for Odot audit adjustments, 386,000 for ADA sidewalk compliance and repair, 750,000 for bridge maintenance, 10,000 for driveway repairs, 100,000 for street striping, 50,000 for traffic calming, 100,000 for community and neighborhood improvements, and 50,000 for building maintenance, mechanical, and electrical. And so total, that's about $10,716,000.
And just remember that this is a proposal, but notice that there's an increase to that bridge maintenance component from 500,000 to 750,000. That's a 50% increase. It's a drop in the bucket to what we need.
And so these are some significant projects that are going to be going on in fiscal year 23. We have that 36th Avenue Northwest Tecumseh to Indian Hills utility relocation, budgeted for about $1 million. We have the Porter Avenue streetscape from Robinson down to Alameda for about $4 million. The James Garner Phase 2 project for about $6.6 million. The Traffic Management Center for about $2.4 million. The Transit Transfer Center site purchase and remodeling for $1.2 million. And that city vehicle wash facility for $1.8 million. And council did put funds into that on February 8th. 684 that's coming from that general fund surplus, 540,000 from the Utilities Authority, and 576,000 from ARPA.
But to be clear,
Councilman
that's the FTA ARPA, not
Oh, yes.
our city.
Yes, my fault.
ARPA money.
FTA
Just wanted to be
ARPA.
clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
And is Transit Transfer Center the language we've finally decided upon? Okay, so we got for now. All right.
For generic.
Okay.
AKA the.
Steve
That's the most clear.
Clearly, yes. Councilmember Holman?
Just to mention it too, the public safety sales tax fund, like the other funds that are sales tax supported, is seeing some positivities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you mention that, if I recall correctly, you said it may not need a general fund subsidy because of that, or was it a different one?
It's a significant reduction in the general fund subsidy from about $2 million to about $500,000 we're projecting this year. And again, that's just a projection. But yes, the increase in sales tax revenue positively impacts on public safety sales tax and public transit sales tax. The domino effect is that because those subsidies are reduced, the general fund is that much better off.
Again, first time since I've been on council that I've heard those words, so.
That's how good Anthony is.
That's
Just-
Shop local.
All right, so moving on to the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, we have some projects underway this fiscal year. We have the Emergency Operations and Communication Center. It's funded from both the PSST fund and ARPA money. About $9.5 million has come from ARPA and the remaining $7 million from PSST, and that totals at $16.5 million. This allows us to fully harden the facility and build it to the needed size. That size is 19,900 square feet. And so far on this project, the project manager, the construction manager at risk, and architecture and engineering are all contracted on that. The design work is well underway, and they're going to break ground in 2022 on this project.
So excited. Yeah.
And then also we have the fire apparatus replacement. This is year 7 of that program, and it's $800,000 for a fire engine.
That's a cheap one too. It's usually like 1.3.
And this is just a slide giving a more detailed breakdown of that fire apparatus replacement schedule. As you can see, 2023 is the $800,000 for a fire engine and also a staff vehicle.
There you go. $2 million for the ladder truck.
Yeah.
$2 million.
But now we got a maintenance facility.
Okay, and so moving on to the Norman Forward Fund. These are projects that have been completed fiscal year ending 22. We have the Ruby Grant Community Park. It's the football practice fields and the trails and the restroom at that park. We have phases 3 and 4 of Griffin Park, and we have the Rotary Park neighborhood park improvements completed.
Councilmember Holman?
I would like to see potentially Norman Forward savings go towards anything else that might be needed at the football thing. I feel like that one's the one that's been shortchanged the most. When I voted for it, I was expecting like a youth football complex, and I'm very appreciative that our staff was able to come up with what they did and put the fields at Ruby Grant and stuff, but if there's anything else they need out there, bleachers or lights, I don't know what it is, but some going forward savings going towards some of that.
And I have to, as staff to the Citizens Financial Oversight Board, remind the council of the recommendation that came from the CFOB about those Norman Forward savings. That where there are project savings, those should remain in the fund balance until all the projects are completed, rather than adding to, previously completed projects. That's their recommendation. Council can choose to do whatever council chooses to do, but just bear that in mind.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so these are just some photographs of the Griffin Park Phase 3 ribbon cutting and the Ruby Grant football fields ribbon cutting. So these are some Norman Forward projects that are underway currently in fiscal year 22. We have Phase 5 of the Griffin Park. We have the Young Family Athletic Center. It has a total cost of $41 million. $22.5 million of that is coming from the Norman Forward sales tax. $4 million was a donation from the Young Family Foundation. $2.7 million is coming from that University North Park TIF fund. We have $6.7 million coming from Norman Regional for their portion, the In Motion Performance Center. We have $3.8 million from a room tax bond and $1.2 million transferred from the Norman Forward Trails project on that one. And construction is beginning in October of 2021, and they're looking to go through October of 2023 on that. We have the Reeves Park baseball and softball complex, the new neighborhood park development at Summit Valley Park, the neighborhood park improvements at Vineyard, Cherry Creek, and Earl Sneed Parks, James Garner Flood to Acres, which is the phase 2 of that project, and the Senior Wellness Center in that southeast corner of the Norman Regional Porter campus.
As we continue to make real progress on what I'm calling Norman Forward 1, I have asked for kind of like a graphic that shows, not only a check mark completed, but a picture of it. So we can start reminding residents that this is what you paid for, here's what it looks like, and we can continue keeping a positive outlook on a Norman Forward 2, because if anything, MAPS has shown us that if you continue to invest in your community, you can do amazing things. But we need to keep telling our story about how successful we have been. So stay tuned for that.
Alright, so this is just some photographs from the Senior Wellness Center on the left, just a rendering of what it's going to look like, and on the right we have a picture from our groundbreaking in November of 2021. We have a photograph of the Young Family Athletic Center, the groundbreaking on the right when Trey Young showed up, and we have on the left a rendering of what that project's going to look like when it's completed. On this slide we have on the left a picture of what's going on at Reeves Park currently, and on the right we have a breakdown of the next few phases of the Griffin Park soccer fields. So some of the future projects, Norman Forward, we're going to have new neighborhood parks. That's a budget of $1.7 million. We have the lease payments for Griffin Park. It's $80,000 a year for $2.4 million total. We have the Canadian River Park for $2 million. The new trail development throughout town for $4.3 million. We have Saxon Park development for $2 million. The neighborhood park improvements for $5.4 million. And we have the traffic improvements project for $2.7 million.
Councilmember Foreman.
What is the traffic improvements for Griffin Park? Just out of curiosity.
A new signal at the entrance on Robinson Street, widening of Robinson Street to 5 lanes. at that signal location, and then connecting 12th and High Meadows on the sort of the northeast corner of the park. It's not in here, but I want to mention, I want to acknowledge David Riesland and our team. We did get funded from Odot for the 12th and High Meadows intersection after a decade or
Yes.
more. So now we're merging that intersection improvement with this road improvement in the park. It's going to be a great access point to the park.
Is there a
Yay, worth it.
timeline on that one?
I know the parks guys are working on the internal stuff for summer, fall, and we think the intersection kicks off around January of '23.
That would be a left-hand turn into Eisenhower.
Right, exactly. It's been missing for so
Yeah.
long.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
just the school issues, now the park issue. So it's a wonderful combination of state funds. The state is funding the intersection 100%.
Oh, wow.
Less than. It is a state highway.
Well, yeah.
It is kind of their deal. But we appreciate them doing that. And then the Norman Forward funds are sort of making up that west leg.
Given it's such a crazy intersection with the school, is waiting till summer maybe a better idea to add that turning lane?
I think it's really going to be next winter, Mayor, by the time we actually get to build
I'm just saying,
that.
when it's
Yeah.
not in a school time,
We
because
can
it's
surely-
already bad normal.
Yeah.
We can sure look at that. You bet.
Okay,
You bet.
I think parents would be willing to wait one more semester to not have a semester worth of horrifying
Correct.
drop-off
Yeah.
experiences.
It's going back like 7 to 6.
If-
Some of this.
Yeah. Yay, okay, thank you.
So onto the room tax fund. This is going to be the parks project portion. Some upcoming projects this fiscal year. We have the historic museum parking for $55,000. We are retiring the debt on the 2002 Norman Municipal Authority golf course bonds, and we are issuing a $3.8 million bond for the Young Family Athletic Center, which was approved by council in August of 2021. So these are some of the
Councilmember Holman,
What is the yearly debt on the golf course? What are we saving by paying it off?
It was like 200 and something thousand.
Yes, 200,000,
270,000 a year.
270,000 a year.
All right, so these are just some of the upcoming challenges for this fiscal year ending '23. We have the I-35 corridor study between Norman, Moore, and Odot. In public transportation, we have the Regional Transportation Authority replacing buses and our Go Norman Transit Plan recommendations. We have fleet replacement, which has gotten more difficult with some of the COVID shortages. We have the
I want to point out with the fleet replacement. So his slide on that showed that we replace, somewhere between 35 vehicles a year in that program, and it's like just under $3 million. That's less than half of what fleet recommends every year for the fleet replacement program, just to put that into perspective.
And then we have the fleet fueling facility that we talked about earlier. We have new traffic signals on state highways and city arterials. We have the 718 North Porter rehab, police training facility updates and maintenance, police department exterior security updates. We have the City Hall Municipal Complex. We have the Building B, Building C, and an unfunded parking expansion. All those are needing funds. We have the police HDU robot. I believe that's a hazardous device unit for like a SWAT team. We have the aging animal welfare incinerators. We have fire station 10, bridge replacements like we discussed, stormwater infrastructure maintenance, the comprehensive land use and transportation plan update, and the rising construction costs for the Young Family Athletic Center and the Senior Wellness Center.
it was mentioned in the mayor's roundtable last week, Captain Clement sits on that now, and she did mention the concerns with the exterior security updates, but she also mentioned body cam replacements. Is that something that's on our radar? Will that come out of public safety sales?
I think they requested that for fiscal year '23. I don't
Okay.
recall the dollar amount, but
We did, Mayor.
You
We
did?
requested it, and it's extremely expensive, like $300,000.
Okay.
But it's due this year, so after this year, it'll still function, it'll go out of warranty, and as they die off, which is pretty regularly is the nature of them, they will go completely dysfunctional.
Okay, thank you. And as we've seen, body cams are helpful on all fronts. So, yes, Captain.
I'll say it seems like we just got those. Same thing with the animal welfare, I mean, it's a brand new building. Did we not replace that equipment when we opened it, or?
Incinerators.
No, the incinerators were not, they were carried over from the old building. In fact, I think one of them was from the 70s maybe, the other one's mid-80s.
We know how to get our money's worth in Norman.
Yeah.
Take a Band-Aid again.
Seems like when they're building a new building, that
Band-aided as much as they could probably do. Right now, they're both functioning. They have one that's a primary, one that's a secondary, but obviously need to, when they die, at some point they're not stopping.
Thank you.
And the cameras, I think, were 2015, 16, something like that.
I'd have been 16, I was here for that conversation.
Okay. And it's been, so they're a while, and they're all little computers, so they're taking a beating.
and the PD exterior security updates, that fencing around the parking lot.
So it's fencing, parking, gates, security, related to that, also ties in the James Garner expansion. We're talking to the traffic folks, we anticipate losing those driveways, which will make that parking lot unserviceable, as well as the parking that we use, which would tie into the park we lease out with the post office, because that parking will go away. Potentially in that program, as well as lighting and other needed things to keep people posted from causing problems with the vehicles, as well as approaching on our staff, especially the staff that is not officers. It's quite a few of them, they're walking out there in a rather dark, not safe environment. We've had problems with that lot regularly, so it's a priority for our guys for sure.
Yeah,
Officers asking about that.
Yeah, and I look forward to seeing what the plan is when we lose those spots on James Garner. I mean, it's gonna happen, right?
As my understanding is that's quite.
Still working on it, Mayor, still working on some final designs.
Okay.
And then one question about Fire Station 10, Chief. Tim.
Yes.
I know we have land for it out of the Destin Landing development. It's supposed to be dedicated for Fire Station, but is Fire Station 10 something we need this year or next year?
Well, certainly it can be justified anytime the council decides to go for that. Our response times in that area are continuing to increase. That's a developing area, and it's putting pressure on our fire station number 3, which is on campus, and then fire station number 9. It's hard for 9 to get down there, just access-wise.
Hard for 3 to get over there too. There's not a direct.
Right. Well, 3 is so tight. I mean, that's our second busiest engine company that services the campus area and the southern parts of the downtown area. So certainly we could use it when the council sees fit to fund it.
Probably comes with an annual operating cost of about $1 million a year that goes with it.
I'd say closer to 1.5.
Yeah, because it'll be at least 9 new staff members that man it.
30 new staff, right? To man a whole station.
I would ask for 15 to staff it properly.
4-man engine company.
Well, we would ask for 5 per shift, and then our minimums would be 4 per shift. That allows one off for either injury, vacation, sick leave, that sort of thing. So you're talking, hopefully we do have the land, probably in the neighborhood of $4 million or so to build it and to put the apparatus in it. So yeah, that's what we're looking at.
So
It's not cheap, but it's
relocation of Fire Station 5, building Fire Station 10, are top structural needs, I guess. And do we have, I don't know, the Destin Landing thing was so many years ago. I don't know if we've locked in that piece of property or where it is.
I
Or,
think it's to be dedicated with the final.
okay. So, not ours yet.
The first section of Destin Landing is coming forward,
Waiting on that.
I think, in the next month. So after all these years, they're beginning the development
I
now.
like the area up by Saxon Park. It's kind of up on a hill there, and it gives us quick access out to Highway 9. We have a ton of wrecks, obviously, out on Highway 9. It allows us to get east a little bit quicker to help in the rural area. So I don't know what, and then there's talk of a road connecting 36 to Saxon Boulevard and water being added right there, which would be advantageous for us. So that's the area I would like to see it, but we can work with whatever we get.
And council, the opportunity to, in the next probably 4 budget cycles, we'll be paying off the debt service in PSST for the $15 million radio acquisition, and one other piece, I think some initial apparatus that we're
Well, the
putting on.
ELC.
So when that debt service is paid off, I think that's about $2.7 million a year.
Yes.
So it puts you in a position to be able to advance Fire Station 10, including staffing for a project that big.
I recognize.
Immediately, that's Fire Station 5. That's what we're
It was her idea to get that land dedicated to Mayor Rosenthal. and they agreed to it, so.
All right, so this is just a slide of some of the next steps in this process. The next meeting is on April 19th. It's just going to be an overview of the proposed fiscal year ending 23 budget for the general and special revenue bonds, revenue funds. And on April 26th, we have our first public hearing on the proposed budget for fiscal year ending 23.
And for those watching, the public hearings are during council meetings.
Yes.
And everyone's welcome to come and comment on April 26th and also May 24th. So mark your calendars now. Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to this challenging list. But I think if, at the last Finance Committee meeting, I think if we hadn't been presented with the $6 million need for the municipal complex renovation, we would have been pretty comfortable going forward with the supplemental amounts for YFAC in the senior center. And I know we have maybe several options of where that could potentially come from now, but it seems to me like that one in particular, since we're getting ready to be under construction and are already under construction, that we might want to make some kind of determination on that 1.5 million.
We're hoping in the next couple of agenda meetings to bring you those contracts to be awarded in the funding sources to make sure we've got the full appropriation. And in our delivery method, the opportunity, it sounds strange, but our ability to award the contract and then begin negotiations with the contractor and our construction manager at risk to pare that need down, it's kind of cart before the horse, but we can't negotiate all those prices until the contract's been awarded. And we can't award the contract until we have all the money appropriated. So.
I know we've been doing value engineering on both of those projects.
All right, let's see that calendar one more time for anyone making notes. All right, any other questions or requests for projects? Okay, thank you so much. All right,
Quick change in venue.
let everyone switch around.
Are we, I don't know, were we planning on moving out there?
First I've heard of it.
Yeah, no, I think we can handle it here, I think.
Oh, well, that's what Bryce
Oh, man, if there is a big old crowd, that's, yeah, we'll take it.
Better shut this.
Yep.
No,
I mean, I was like, few of all people.
She thinks you are that doctor.
I know you look at
I'll sit down.
We can adopt it as Nope.
It's okay. Keep going.
Yes,
okay, we need to make that clear.
yes.
Sit right here?
Yeah.
All right.
Last page in this one, and I started on March 30th, 2020.
Sorry, guys.
The money's worth.
Okay.
So Julie, if you guys want to go ahead and share your screen with that title slide, and then I'll kind of talk for a minute, and then we'll turn it over to y'all.
Okay, let's give just a couple minutes for everyone to get back.
Lisa, can you let us know how many people are in the room?
Let's see, we have the council, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 audience members and the council at this point.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
You have a laptop and everyone has a big screen.
I'm sorry?
You have a laptop and everyone else can see us on a big screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we see you and the screen.
Okay, awesome, thank you. See us on a big screen?
YouTube working? Yes.
All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. Lisa Craig, CDBG Grants Manager. I have some prepared remarks so I don't just ramble on for y'all for an hour or so. Mayor, Council, and community partners, it was almost exactly 1 year ago that Council approved a contract with Homebase for the development of a homeless strategic plan. While the City of Norman provided the funding for the plan, it is not the city's plan, it is the community's. If you had asked me a couple weeks ago if I thought I would be standing here, I would have laughed, but it seems that sometimes life takes strange, unexpected turns. My role in this was simply second chair, if even that. I was really more like the stagehand. Heavy lifting was done by Michelle Evans and the steering committee and the continuum of care. Michelle was the driver that assisted in the coordination with the consultant and the community. Last Thursday was her last day with the city, and we wish her well in her future endeavors. As I mentioned, this effort took approximately a year to get us to this point. There was a steering committee of community volunteers, the continuum of care members, and community surveys and interviews were held. As we've told you previously, over 500 people completed the online and in-person survey. Over 20 interviews were held with the stakeholders. 5 different focus groups were facilitated. Each of these are detailed within the gaps analysis, which was previously released, and both the gaps analysis and the action plan are available on the website. This is not the first time that an effort such as this has been undertaken. In the late 1990s, a grassroots effort came forward from the Social Services Coordinating Council to discuss homelessness for the first time. This effort was soon branded the Homeless Here Coalition, and as HUD formalized their efforts in addressing homelessness, this group formed the foundation of what was later the Cleveland County Continuum of Care. Before that, it was this group of dedicated volunteers that was the driving force that established East Main Place and secured their funding with the Transitional Housing Grant. From these efforts, a 10-year plan to address chronic homelessness was developed in 2005. This plan was very aggressive and overwhelming, almost like a Sears catalog approach. It compiled multiple solutions that were being implemented across the country at that time. The plan was revised twice before realizing that while it was ambitious, it was not feasible, but it had begun the conversation and raised the awareness within the community. In July of 2010, 2 nonprofits, Common Ground and Community Solutions, launched the 100,000 Homes campaign. They set the ambitious goal of housing 100,000 of the most difficult to house individuals into permanent supportive housing across the country within 5 years. We are very proud to state that our continuum was one of the 168 communities that came together to meet as well exceed that goal by the summer of 2014, a whole 18 months ahead of the schedule. The basis of this effort was expanded and continued on with various initiatives, Zero 2015, Ready for Zero, and the current Built for Zero campaigns, all of which the continuum participated. We simply refer it to as Zero now. Even to this date, data is tracked and reported to Community Solutions. As the continuum became active in the efforts coordinated by the Zero programs, multiple Norman COC members volunteered to assist Oklahoma City with their Registry Week. Taking what we had learned, we conducted our own Registry Week that was branded iCount in December 14. This effort utilized over 100 volunteers that went out into locations at 4 o'clock in the morning for 3 days straight to assess anyone they encountered that could be homeless. This was the beginning of the efforts to establish a by-name list where each person that is homeless isn't a number on a report, but an actual person with a name and is tracked thusly. As a result of this, a report was compiled. Many of you have heard the story by Malcolm Gladwell about $1 Million Murray and the cost of homelessness. If you haven't, I encourage you to look it up. This report details the public cost in allowing a person to be street homeless. Utilizing the same methodology as other communities used, including Oklahoma City, we were able to compile with the average public cost, meaning police, fire, sanitation, ambulance, emergency room, of the individuals we assessed during the week. Our calculations showed that the average cost of over $40,000 per year, per person, of the public cost for allowing someone to be street homeless. This number aligned closely with the results from the other communities. Remember, those were 2014 dollars. As a result of those efforts, we realized that we had several $1 million Normans within our community. During this time frame, the continuum determined that an effort was needed to be made to map out our system to identify the gaps and the duplications of services. Spangler and Associates was contracted to perform this, and the data compiled, while immediately usable, was indicated that a deeper dive was needed. This brings us up to the 2020 bond issue, where 4 different propositions were put to a vote. I happened to be at the council meeting where the ballot initiatives were decided upon and was shocked when Mr. Fowler requested that an initiative to address homelessness be added to the other items. There's a saying within the grant writing and management community that goes something like this: it's all fun and games until the project gets funded. To provide context to the community in regards to asking for funding of $5 million, a commitment was made that prior to the dedication of any funding from the bond issue, a comprehensive housing strategy would be developed. Everyone here knows what happened with the election. All 4 initiatives failed, but lo and behold, the one that came the closest to passing was Proposition 4, homelessness, which received 49.19% in favor. The commitment to conduct the strategic plan was carried forward, and that's why we're here tonight. In contrast to the previous studies that have been completed, this one is substantially different in that it includes a strategic or action plan for the community to utilize. This plan will begin a targeted process to address the complex issues surrounding homelessness. This plan, while concrete, is also flexible and is intended to be a living document that can be adjusted as needed during implementation as needs and situations change. All these somewhat unrelated events have resulted in that there is now a community conversation. This conversation has reached the visibility in that recent municipal elections included homelessness within each of the candidates' platforms. We are in a very unique position in these unprecedented times in several ways. The federal and state governments are aligning efforts to provide funding streams for both capital and operations. The realization of the limited success of providing small amounts of funding delivered in silos to solve complex overlapping problems have been recognized and changes have been implemented. The period of transition here at the local level, with the City of Norman stepping back from the leadership role of the collaborative applicant to a supporting role, is an opportunity for the continuum of care to flourish under their own leadership. I've heard several comments from COC and public members after their review of the document. I'll paraphrase that bold and ambitious was the main theme, although there were several more colorful phrases that were mentioned. Another saying I like to quote is, "Some is not a number and soon is not a time." This plan is not based on emotions. This plan provides serious, detailed strategies. The implementation of this plan is a very transformative step for our community to take. It is transformative for not just the individuals and families that find themselves experiencing homelessness in Cleveland County, but also the lives of people that do this work day in and day out. Over the last 30 years or so, there have been many successes, failures, and stalled initiatives. But with each, the COC has learned from the experience, picked themselves up, and kept going. I am the first to admit that the duties pertaining to, as I call it, the people stuff, is not really my wheelhouse. Not anywhere in my educational background, but I fell into it both personally and professionally. I admit up front that I came nowhere close to the passion and professionalism of those who have embraced this as a career or volunteer in these efforts. This group of providers and volunteers have my utmost respect in the work that they do each and every day. It is the passion that drives them, because from what I hear, it really isn't the salary package that comes with it. This plan is a game changer. This is a choice to select the red pill or the blue pill. Are you guys familiar with the Matrix? Okay. A lasting impression I had on this was at the National Alliance to End Homeless Conference, when Becky Canis went into a very detailed and animated discussion about this very movie subject as it refers to homelessness. Won't bore you with the details. It's on YouTube. It's fascinating. But the idea was that the blue pill is the continuity of the current state, while the red pill is the much riskier option, but provides the opportunity for creativity and the possibility of change. Throughout this long-winded talk, you've heard me referred to as the community or our community many times. This plan does not belong to the city of Norman. This plan belongs to the citizens of Cleveland County, our community. Many years ago, when we were first heading down this road, I was struggling to find some sort of a context in which to discuss homelessness with the public. Former colleague Susan Atkinson helped me craft a call to action and how to ask the public for help. It went something like this. We're not asking you to feel guilty. We're not asking you to contribute money. We are asking you to realize that this is a problem and that it exists in our community. We're asking for your support, we're asking for your emotional support, and we're asking for your political support. These words still ring true today, and so without further delay, I'd like to introduce Julie and David from Homebase, who will present to you our community's strategic homeless plan. So there you go. Y'all have it.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks everyone. We can't see you all, but we know you're there. And many of you already know Homebase, but I wanted to just give ourselves a chance to introduce ourselves again. My name is Julie Silas, and I'm a directing attorney at Homebase, and I'll tell you a little bit about us in a second, but I'll let David introduce himself.
Thanks, Julie, and to Lisa, thank you so much for being a great partner in this. You and Michelle have been amazing in stewarding this process there for the folks of Cleveland County. I am David Dirks. I'm a senior staff attorney for Homebase. I may have met some of you in the room because I did come to the city to do the community meetings that we held in December of last year. And I just want to tell you all, we're off the heels of an interesting Super Bowl game. And I know how excited some people were and some people weren't with the two teams. However, it still brought out a great spirit, and that's the spirit of champions. And I just want you all to be very excited about this action plan, because we are excited about this action plan. So I know it's late. I know you all had a great meeting before us. So just want you to keep that momentum going and just give us just a few more minutes, and we will rest assured it'll be a great meeting today. Julie, back to you.
Thanks, David. So I was muted. Just a little bit about Homebase. I know we've met many of you already, but just giving some background. Homebase is a nonprofit organization. We've been around for over 30 years and we work all over the country. We're mission driven and our focus is on preventing and ending homelessness. We partner with, we're a HUD TA provider and other state TA providers, as well as partnering locally with states, with counties, with cities, nonprofit organizations, working to provide them support and guidance as they strive to end and prevent homelessness. And all our work is specific to communities. It's very customized. We have a breadth of expertise and we know about best practices, but our work is very focused on learning about what's going on in the community, partnering with folks who've been embedded in the community forever, and particularly people with lived experience of homelessness who've had touched the homeless system of care, been served or not served by it, and looking at all those, all the issues that get raised. So we have been, as Lisa mentioned, been with you all, working with you all for almost a year, and had a pleasure of being able to work one-on-one with organizations and individuals holding focus groups, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute. David.
Okay, yeah, so I think we skipped one.
Yeah, so I thought it was me. So what we're going to do today is you all have access to the action plan. Hopefully you've read it or at least skimmed it. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time going over the high level of that action plan, just in case, so that everyone's on the same page. And then we're going to talk about what the first year might look like for you all, because as Lisa said, and other people said, it's bold, it's ambitious, and it's really meant to be a multi-year plan. And so, and flexible. So you will have the opportunity to focus, revise, and really kind of pinpoint what you can do and what you all as a community can do at any given time. And since we're poised here for that first year implementation, we want to spend much of this evening talking about what that might look like and getting your all's feedback and having a community conversation about that.
Yeah, and I'll just say about the action plan before I go into the next slide is that it's, as Lisa stated, it is, or as we stated, we really tried to tailor it to Cleveland County, right? But there are sort of, and we'll explain it, there are strategies, there are goals, there are strategies, and then there are action steps. The action steps can be changed, they can be edited a few, but we just really created those action steps based off of feedback, what we knew about the community there, and just hope those things really align with what you all see and think that the citizens there need. Next slide, Julie. All right, so talking a little bit about the action plan process. So as Elisa stated, and I know that a lot of you probably have already viewed the gaps analysis, but obviously we really focused on community input. We held those focus groups, we did surveys, stakeholder interviews, we looked at the data, PIT count, from the housing inventory count, and other systems, and then we created an assessment and gaps analysis. As I stated, I came there in December. We put out a survey to get feedback, but we also came in person to listen to community members face to face about that gaps analysis. We took that feedback and we drafted and finalized the action plan. And then now we're here to discuss the implementation process, which is, how do we prioritize the strategies and action steps? How do we agree to short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions? What are some of those things that we might need to shift from a long-term category to a shorter-term category? Those are the type of conversations when you're viewing this, when you're viewing a document in totality, you can sort of make that assessment and decide as a group, or as, we'll talk about sort of creating sort of a committee to see how you want to attack, I hate that word, how you want to address some of the goals in this action plan. So we really wanted to go over some key principles here. And the first one is housing first. I just want to state that housing first is not housing only. It's based off of years of research and evidence-based practices. Housing first means that we just want to get people off of the street into housing and into services if they need it, right? So the thing is here, we want to make sure that no plan to reduce homelessness or to respond to homelessness is going to be successful without additional housing opportunities. So we're going to talk about some creative ways that you all can do that, and more examples of what to do in terms of creating more affordable housing opportunities are pointed out in the action plan as well as the gap analysis. The second principle that's important here, and especially for Cleveland County, is to include every voice, right? Include the voice of people with lived experience. Include the voice of some of the organizations and stakeholders that sometimes make our jobs a little bit hard, but especially the COC and the cities of Norman, Moore, and Noble. We do understand that there are 3 cities there in Cleveland County, and we also understand that all should not rest on the city of Norman. So including both housed and homeless neighbors in each of those cities and throughout the county is vital to success. The third principle that we have is the person-centered approach. And I always like to approach the person-centered approach by thinking about, if you have children, and I don't at this time, but been raised in a house with other siblings, but if you have children, they come from the same 2 parents, or they come from you all, and you know that you have one child that acts this way, and you have another child that acts a certain way, but you approach your parenting and how you interact with that child a little bit differently, but you're still teaching those children the same type of values, and you're still trying to help raise them. Now take it out of the parent-children's sort of analogy and put it into an employer-employee analogy, right? You have people with different positions, but each and every person comes to us with their own lived experience, sort of say, whether it's homelessness or whether it's, whatever it is, right? So how we interact and how we approach individuals should be based on how they come to us. So, and that includes an approach that is trauma-informed. Making sure that we're empathetic and effective for those at risk of or experiencing homelessness. Creating a system that can provide customized responses to the immensely complicated circumstances that surround homelessness. And really, that's a lot of words here. But really what that means is that, a lot of times you have a menu of options that you can help folks, right? But how you move a person through the system may be different person to person, even with the same menu of options, right? And that requires training. It requires training in trauma-informed care. It requires training in how do you focus persons from different housing environments and how they have experienced homelessness throughout their lives. But it also focuses on improving housing outcomes and overall well-being for individuals, families, and the community as a whole. And I think I have this one too. Okay, so those were our principles, overarching principles, right? So in each of these, as I stated, the action plan was drafted to include some broad goals, some individual strategies, and key action steps that can be taken to achieve those strategies and then in turn achieve the goal. So we created 3 goals in the action plan, and the first one was secure a housing future for all Norman residents. And I'm going to make an edit here, and that's really for all Cleveland County residents. Goal number 2 is increasing access to the homeless emergency response services. And goal number 3 is to mobilize the citywide response, and that's countywide response to prevent and end homelessness there in Cleveland County and especially Norman.
So we're going to go through each of these goals and kind of break them down by the strategies that are in the plan, and then give some examples of action steps to create a context for having the conversation about how you all want to prioritize and use resources in that first year. We'll start with goal 1. And goal 1 is secure housing future for all Cleveland County residents. I'm going to adapt that brilliant idea as well. And the 4 strategies that we as a community, and I'm saying we as a community because we as a consultant used the feedback that you all gave us through the surveys, the interviews, the focus groups, the meetings, to come up with these 4 priorities, these 4 strategies, based on all the information and feedback and the needs and what we know and what we learned about Norton and Cleveland County. So one is to access and use available public and private land for housing. And one of the things that, showing our flexibility, I would add to that, not only land, but also if there's buildings or places that aren't being used in one way, how can we make assess and use those to be able to address housing and homelessness? So not just the land itself, but also, are there buildings that are available? Are there buildings that can be repurposed, that kind of thing? And then, of course, looking at, are there any policies, local policies that can be protected or expanded to be able to make housing more accessible to more people who live in the county? Develop a greater access to affordable housing through a coordinated landlord engagement campaign, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then expanding housing opportunities through the COC's Coordinated Assistance Program. And we're not going to go through each of these specifically, each of these strategies, but we are going to focus on one just to kind of give an example. So you have the goal of securing a housing future for all Cleveland County residents, the strategy, a landlord engagement campaign, and then we're going to put up a couple action steps. And so these action steps, I don't want to spin through these so fast. So if this becomes a priority for the first year, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, here's some action steps to think about. So, for example, creating a strategy, establishing a strategy, bringing together a committee, identifying key stakeholders to come up with a plan, a strategy, really, to getting public about landlords, recruiting landlords, engaging in outreach to property managers, a whole bunch of things that could be part of this, but they're clear, specific action steps that would create a framework and create a plan that would allow you all to really engage deeply around landlord engagement. Because one of the biggest hurdles right now is it's hard for people to get housing, right? And one of the hurdles is landlords don't always want to rent to people experiencing homelessness. There aren't a lot of one-bedroom apartments, and oftentimes you have single individuals. So how do you overcome those barriers? And a landlord campaign can be one of those. Another one that we identified is helping create a client portfolio. And what that means is that if people have a misperception that it's not good and not a good risk to rent to people who have experience of homelessness, how can that be overcome? In addition to any kind of work you're doing directly with landlords, how can you work with people experiencing homelessness to help support them and build a foundation that makes it easier for them to build a relationship with a landlord and be able to be chosen as a renter? And so sometimes people have been evicted, they have credit issues having been experiencing homelessness, and so those can often be barriers to being able to actually rent. And so how can the community help build a client portfolio, maybe help people repair their credit, maybe work on eviction expungement, maybe write letters of support. And so pulling together some kind of portfolio that people can have in hand when they're going to rent an apartment that overcomes some of those hurdles or misperceptions that people have about renting to people experiencing homelessness. A couple other ones are Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund and a financial incentive program for landlords. And those are 2 ways that can help overcome those barriers, sometimes misperceptions about what it means to rent to people who have past experience being homeless. So Risk Mitigation Fund allows you to provide compensation to landlords to mitigate any damage that might occur when someone who's experiencing homelessness rents a house or apartment and something doesn't go well. Now, I will say this is where we can come in with best practices. These funds often are not utilized, but having them in place brings a peace of mind to a landlord knowing I can take this risk because if it doesn't go well, and I'm well-meaning and I want to do the right thing, but I can't take that risk, but if it doesn't go well, there's a fund that will compensate me, and so I won't have to take that out of pocket, and that makes it easier for me to take that risk. we know in communities that have these mitigation funds, they're often underutilized, and usually the money just sits there, but the idea of them being there can bring down the risk for landlords, and they're willing to go ahead and do that. And sometimes they do have to be used. I don't want to say that they don't ever get used, but they more often provide the peace of mind and make landlords more comfortable in the partnership taking that risk. And then also creating an incentive fund where you rent to, where there's incentives for landlords who are willing to rent to people experiencing homelessness or moving out of homelessness into permanent housing. So those are just some examples under that goal. And we'll move on to goal number 2, David. Oh, sorry, we won't. I'm driving and talking at the same time, and I forget what I'm doing. So important, and David talked about this a little bit, some of the goals, there's some things to achieve short term, some things to achieve medium term, and some things to achieve long term. So we, in each of the goals, set up some metrics, because you're going to make these efforts, you all are going to make a plan, and you want to know what are you striving for and how are you going to measure success. And so there are metrics, depending on short, medium, and long term. And for example, if you do decide to do a landlord engagement campaign and a mitigation fund, a metric might be that you have a landlord mitigation fund or an incentive fund. It's developed, it's funded, and it's actually providing resources to local landlords by the end of next December. You guys might be ready to move that to the short term. That's where flexibility is. If you guys pull together a landlord engagement campaign, you set up the fund and start doing stuff, you could change that to December 2022 and have it end up being a metric that gets met much sooner. But that's an example, and all these metrics are just examples, and they're all in the actual action plan itself. And we'll talk through each of them as we go through these goals. And thank you for your patience for me forgetting what we're supposed to do. Okay, goal number 2, David.
No problem, Jimmy. We're going to work through this. So, goal number 2, as we said, is increasing access to homeless emergency response services, right? So, this includes things like increasing access to low barrier housing focused shelter. That's a lot there too. But when we mean low barrier, we mean when you ask folks that are maybe living on the street, why don't you want to go in? It's usually, because of rules or because of some things that they have to complete before going in. And best practices throughout the country have shown that when you remove certain barriers, you can move people inside quicker and help them quicker in order to find housing. And that's sort of the second part of that, is making sure that we don't just have shelter for shelter's sake, but that we have housing-focused shelter, meaning that we're focused on moving that person from the street to shelter into housing as quickly as possible. The second strategy here is expanding street and encampment outreach, including treatment for mental health and substance use disorders, right? So for those folks who do not want to come in and they want, they still need help, right? And expanding street and encampment outreach is important because the more opportunities you have to meet and touch those individuals, the more you can build trust. And then you can bring in some of the mental health and substance use disorders providers in order to provide street medicine right there, on the street until they're ready to go in and receive those services. The third strategy that we have is expanding supportive services and housing-focused case management. So this includes, what about those folks who may not be living on the street, right? They are a week away from getting, from being homeless, or this may be for you, or any other type of population of folks where they are receiving case management, and we're ensuring that it's also focused on housing. And that also includes keeping them in their housing. Not just finding housing, but keeping them in it. The fourth strategy here is improving transportation to employment services and shelter. So one of the biggest, I would say, needs that we heard from the community, including a lack of transportation, right? If you can't get transportation to get to work, how can you keep jobs? If you can't get transportation to go see a doctor, how can you make sure your health, how can you make sure you're receiving services for your health or for your mental health? And then also, how do you get to the shelter if you can't, if there's no transportation? So even if we offer these services, we still have to make sure that people have access to get to them. And as we did with the first goal, we're going to also focus on one goal here as well. And that one is increasing access to low barrier housing focused shelters. So one of the first sort of key action steps here is establishing at least one permanent year-round low barrier housing focused shelter with day and night services, right? So we're really talking about a 24-hour, close to a 24-hour shelter where people can come in from the elements, whether it's cold or hot, and they're able to stay overnight. They're able to come in for day services where they can, receive mail, check up on their case manager, and we're really able to make that contact more frequently with them so that we can move them out of the shelter and into housing. The second action step here is providing additional support for people to exit shelters, right? The key here is really figuring out who are those long stayers in shelters. What are the barriers to them leaving, right? Is it those barriers that Julie touched on in goal number 1? Meaning, do they have background issues? Are there mental health and substance abuse issues? So now that we have them in shelter, how can we make sure that they're receiving the services that they need to exit shelter to permanent housing? And that's through case management, motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, and housing-focused case management and planning as well. So the third action step is, and something that I think a lot of people support, is having wraparound services and connections, right? If you're able to make sure that those services are provided overnight and day shelters, then you're able to make sure that you can answer crises when they come up, and that people are getting full support for the needs that they have in order to, remain in shelter and then hopefully in their housing. But I think we have, I was going to say, there should be one more. So the fourth one here is, also reducing existing barriers. So, again, taking a real assessment of what do these rules accomplish. Short of safety, why do we have rules and why are people, if those rules are a barrier to people coming in, how can we adjust those rules to make the shelters more attractive for folks to come in, right? How can we bridge that gap and build those relationships, right? Most rules, if they're related to, you can't come in, you have to be sober, or you can't be drunk, you can't be under the influence. Those things are really hard for people who are struggling with substance use and mental health issues, right? So if the goal is to help people with substance use disorders or mental health, but we can't even bring them in, we have to ask our question, are we really solving the problem? Or are we just adding more fuel to the fire there, right? And that's really the questions to ask about removing barriers, especially for shelters. Definitely want to make sure that folks are safe and that the shelters are operating smoothly, but we also want to make sure that we are reaching folks that need to come, reaching out to folks and bringing them in so that they receive the services that they need. So as we showed sort of with goal number 1, these are also some example metrics here, and we're going to focus here on metric 2.5. And we want to make sure that this metric here might be a short-term metric. I actually think that it could possibly be one for what I know about what's happening in the city there, and that's at least one year-round low barrier housing focused shelter that's established and providing services no later than June 2023. I actually think that this can happen this year, which is a great thing for you all, because I think that you can just increase services and think about the best practices there to bring more folks in and off the street.
Okay, I'm gonna do goal 3. And goal 3 is mobilizing countywide response to prevent end homelessness, and has a range of strategies, all the way from expanding coordinated prevention and diversion assistance is already existing, developing a public education campaign about the homeless system of care and helping kind of make clear what misperceptions there are and what the homeless community looks like in people's experiences, all the way to doing more robust data collection. I'm not going to go through all these because they're 5, but I'm going to focus also, as we've been doing, on the data collection. So just kind of stepping back and thinking about data, like data is very useful for being able to see patterns and practices and understanding what's happening in a community. And right now there are barriers, I think, in Cleveland County for you all to be able to collect the data in a way that allows you to use it to evaluate what's going on and being able to be flexible and adapt some of the plans you have. And so one of the things that we saw and that we heard a lot from the community was an importance of like, how can we collect this data and make the data more meaningful so we can use it even sometimes more often than once a year, which is how it often is collected, just for once a year. So these are some of the action steps. These 2 are really looking at focusing on data quality plan and creating a data committee or revitalizing the data committee that already exists that can kind of look at, all right, what's working about our data, how we collect our data, who's participating in data, what could use improvement, and really like a group of people who can focus on that and then come up with a roadmap, a data quality plan that can get you to the place where your data quality is so strong that you can start using it regularly, having data reports and everything regular that allows you all to evaluate the data and look at what's going on in your community by using data to help kind of do the needs and gaps analysis that we did, looking at a whole bunch of data, but giving you the ability to do that on an ongoing basis as a community. And another one of those things is looking at how you do your point-in-time count, especially regarding people in emergency shelters and chronic homeless status, and evaluating that. And that, again, can come out of that group of folks who are looking at data and looking at the data at being part of a data committee. Another thing that to do is, assuming that all that great work happens with a data committee and a quality plan, the next 2 really are looking at how can you use that data more effectively? How can you do data reports or monitor the data as it comes in? Oftentimes you do it at the end of the year or right before you have to report to HUD, but there's ways that you might want to use that data to understand how people are moving through the system, to understand if you're having an increase in first-time homelessness. When you start to see those patterns, not waiting a whole year, you can then go, what's going on? Oh, this property manager that had a lot of people who were low income living refurbished and kicked everybody out, and all of a sudden now we have, but you might not know that if you don't see that. So being able to use the data to help you understand what's going on in the community, and then being able to respond to that. And then lastly, one of this is that seeking out additional resources to participate in the Homeless Management Information System, which is your data repository for the homeless system of care. Not everyone who participates, not all the service providers are able to enter their data in because it costs a little bit of money, or you need organizations need to have someone on staff who can do that, or even if they have someone on staff, they may need to train them. And so trying to see how resources can be leveraged to subsidize the licensing costs or to help sponsor agencies so that they can participate, get their staff trained, bring in a staff person. And so the goal there is that if everyone who's touching and working with the system is participating in it, then you get good data, then you can evaluate that data and you can use that information to help you craft and be flexible in terms of how you're working in the community and helping meet the needs of people who are in need. So similar to the other 3 goals, we have some example metrics, and you'll see here this one probably is a good medium term. David and I both, in both goal 1 and 2, we're looking at medium term ones that based on information and what we understand of your community may get achieved earlier, but this is probably one that may take a little longer to do, is creating you need to revitalize a data committee, you need to come up with a data quality plan, you need to think about how, assuming the data quality plan asks everybody to participate, you need to figure out what those subsidies would be so that everyone can. And I think this was intended to be December 2023, not December 2022, but that just gives you an example. And the whole goal of this is to just walk through all 3 of these goals and give you strong examples so that you have a good sense of what you're being asked to do as a community with this action plan. So I'm going to pass it to David to lead us in the next conversation. And we're getting to a place where we're not just talking at you, so it's coming soon.
I was just going to ask, I know that was a lot of information, and we ran through it. So just want to make sure we give space if there are any questions, anything that we need to clarify before we move forward. Just let us know.
Lisa, do you want to, do you see anyone, maybe you guys can raise your hand if there's any questions about anything that we went through already?
Y'all good? We're good.
Okay.
So, this is the fun part, so I hope you all are ready to interact a little bit, because we're going to talk about the first year implementation, right, and what that looks like. I do want to take time right here to just discuss a little bit about some opportunities that are coming your way, and we're seeing them in a lot of communities that there's some historic federal funding in addition to what was received because of the COVID-19 funding, but there's home art funding that's coming. I believe you all received about $5 million, and with this team, actually, we're actually in the process of doing an allocation plan in Fort Wayne, and we know that you can do some amazing things with that money as far as infrastructure is concerned that historically has been very difficult because of the amount of money and because of the strings attached to the money did not necessarily allow for infrastructure building. And what I mean by that, actually building the shelter or doing something like that to actually build a new program or build housing in the city. So that's amazing. That's an amazing opportunity. As well as increased CDBG funding as well. So we know that Norman and Cleveland County is going to be receiving additional funds and will be having access to this funding, which is great. And we want to make sure that we take advantage and create a plan, which this is actually great timing for the gaps analysis and this action plan in conjunction with Homework and CDBG to maximize and leverage the work that we've all been doing for the last year to make some smart investments in things that we know that the community needs. Okay? So let's talk about the first year implementation here. So really simple, and I know that you all are really smart persons in the room, but one of the first things that we always look at in terms of next steps is confirming the year 1 commitments, right? What are the achievable first year priorities, right? If they are indeed landlord engagement and supportive services, if they're landlord engagement, or I forget what the other ones were, low barrier shelter, and the other one was improving the data plan, then, let's establish a committee of folks. Who needs to be involved in order to make sure that those things occur? This is where the rubber meets the road here, right? If we make sure that we have the right people in place, then we can make sure that those metrics are met, but also that the strategies that were, the action steps that were drafted under each of the strategies can be achieved. So, and we know that we will assign not only a committee, but actual responsible parties that are going to be responsible for figuring out what that strategy really, truly is and implementing that strategy to completion. And then you want to map out that 1 year by quarters and priorities, right? So How often should we meet? What are those metrics that we should be meeting? We gave sample metrics, but you probably need metrics for each quarter. Establishing the committee is quarter one. Making sure that the committee develops a plan is quarter two. Implementing that plan is quarter three. And those priorities will align in that, in how you roll out that plan. So the next sort of block here is beginning the implementation process, right? So you're convening the committees. I think I said this already, but how many times is the committees going to meet, right? Establish that up front so that people that are going to be responsible for implementing those goals know what the commitment is, right? And that they can initiate the action steps and also make sure that they're realistic. Not going to get into the smart or smarter goals, but that's actually also a good way of establishing how you should go about establishing the goals and which goals you should prioritize.
The other thing to say too is, especially around the quarters, you all having that first year plan, you're a fairly small community, and so it may be the same 25 people who are really key leaders to do this work, and it means you can stagger that work. So you might start out in the first quarter, you might focus on, I'll just use the landlord engagement because we talked about that so much. You might start landlord engagement right away. There is a commitment on landlord engagement, and then maybe two of those people on that committee also really want to work on supportive services, but you wait and you don't say, we're going to do it all at once, all the time for 12 months. Maybe you stagger it, and so you're not burning people out, you're maximizing that planning in committees, and then maybe those people move to planning for another committee while other people start doing the action steps and the implementation. So thinking of the quarters to give you all some of that flexibility so that people aren't stretched thin and you're still being able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So I wanted to just kind of flag for you some achievable year one priorities based on what we know about your community. And I just will say that these 5, and we'll talk about each of them specifically, are based on our information and what we gained from talking to all of you, what we heard from the consumer surveys, what we heard from people experiencing homelessness, these all 5 are very achievable goals. There's quite a bit of consensus in the community, both from entities like the city who has some resources to put forward to support some of this work, and also intentionality of the community as a whole. So I want to talk a little bit about each of them. So a county landlord engagement campaign, you have one that's already, I think you have the start of something that's been going, but I think that there's a real interest and effort to engage in that in much more earnestly. So I think, and there's resources, as David said, this unusual resources that are in a moment in time that you might not ever have again to be able to leverage for that. So we think that that might be a place where you can put some investment. And then a year-round low barrier housing focused shelter, you are already very far along in that you had a warming and cooling shelter. I think it was a warming shelter that was traditionally open from December to March every year. And then with some resources from the city and from federal government, you all have expanded that, and that's continuing to expand that. So that's in place and funded through August. And from the experience that we've heard from people, this has been a real important resource in the community. People who have never touched the homeless system of care are entering into the shelter. They're building trusting relationships with homeless service providers, and they're getting some of that wraparound services to make it easier for them to move off the streets into shelters, from the shelters into supportive housing or permanent housing. So I think that there's a real commitment from the city, seeing the value of this and wanting to continue to move that forward. So we think that they're putting some resource, some brain power into thinking about what this might look like, what resources are available, really kind of digging in and figuring that out is a worthwhile endeavor, and something that, as originally we might have said medium, but I think there's enough momentum knowing that there's more resources to really move that forward sooner rather than later. Another issue is single room occupancy. units. So you all are in a unique situation in Cleveland County, and especially in the city of Norman. Most of the apartments that are available, that exist in your community, are 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. There's not a lot of places for single individuals to go as they transition to permanent housing. And so single room occupancy, I think there's support from the city, I think there's support from the Public Housing Authority. There's at least an interest in exploring, are there opportunities to create supportive single room occupancy units in places throughout the city, throughout the county. And so putting some thinking into that, partnering with the Public Housing Authority, the city, housing developers, community members to think about what that would look like is really important. So we think that, yes.
Sorry, I was just gonna add there, I actually attended a Rapid Housing Roundtable today that was sponsored by SNAPS. And one of the key things that they talked about was master leasing, in addition to sort of the SROs, are to shared housing, right? Because that's a distant cousin of SROs. So think of creating a master lease where a program is actually sponsoring the lease for the persons, and they actually, I don't want to say own that unit, but they're able to do what they want to do with that unit, right? So for folks who can share rooms, if it's a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom, or put different types of clients into a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment, then you're able to create those single room occupancy units or shared housing units, all right? And those are very different, but very close cousins. And a master lease agreement has been used to be very successful in that sense, because it's also guaranteeing the money for the landlord as well, right? And it comes in with those mitigation funds and all those other different things. So there are some really cool best practices for implementing this, even through a pilot program, right? Maybe you say, we want to create at least 20 units to see how it works. How can we do that in a master lease type of environment, right? So think of these things and try to be creative. Think of some of these things as in terms of a pilot program as well. That's a creative way of seeing how to make sure that it works, and work through some of those bumps in the road as well.
Yeah, especially given the community's lack of single room housing, both of those strategies are very much worth exploring. So the moving on policy for Public Housing Authority is something that you all have, I think, in place, but it's temporary. It's informal, it's not formalized, but it's a policy that says when there are housing choice vouchers available, we will prioritize people who are no longer in need of permanent supportive housing. They've had the supportive services, they've got the job lined up, they've done some of their life skills training, so they know how to make a budget and make sure their rent gets paid on time, and they're ready to transition to permanent housing without the supportive services. The Public Housing Authority can prioritize moving some of those vouchers to support those individuals. And that does 2 things. It helps people transition out of supportive housing when they don't need it anymore, but it also opens up that supportive housing, the permanent supportive housing, to more people. Because in many communities, that permanent supportive housing is really limited, and if there isn't a way to help people transition to permanent housing that doesn't need those supports, then those permanent housing that do have supports never opens up for new people to transition out of shelter into those. So that's something that would just take some policy change in Public Housing Authority. One of the cool things about that is HUD, when they look at scoring you for funding for next year for the COC, there's credit when the Public Housing Authority has a move-on policy and prioritizes people who are in permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing to get them into the housing choice voucher and other permanent housing policies. So I think that we think this has a real possibility and is something worth exploring. And then the last one is a broad category, optional wraparound services. There's been clear messaging from the community across the board that you need more case management. As was mentioned earlier, there's lots of opportunities for street outreach. Street outreach sometimes is one of the most useful services in terms of building support, building trust, helping understand what people's needs are, and making the environment such that people are comfortable moving from an unhoused situation to be sheltered and then into more stable housing. And so, and then the last one is more mental health services. So looking at what funding might be available, talking together about knowing what you know about the gaps analysis and the needs assessment, how to prioritize services. Do you need a housing, more investment in housing navigation to help manage if you set up a master lease program or SROs, or if there's tenant-based rental assistance, being able to have someone who's helping do all that. So those would be the areas that we've heard a lot about from you all about how to focus, but the idea would be to create a team who's really thinking about this and deciding how to prioritize. And before I hand it over to David, I just want to say again, these are 5 big issues, and if you did all 5 of these, we would be so proud to look back in Cleveland County, and we think you can. And again, it's really about staggering it and not trying to do it all at once. And you have a much bigger plan. After this first year, you can do more and more and more. But we think that this packet can be really achievable if you're conscientious, not burning each other out, making those plans and kind of staggering it and building up to it, that this is all really achievable for you all in your community. So I'm going to stop sharing.
I just wanted to say one thing about the move-on policy for public housing authorities. What we've seen with the new EHBs that went online last summer is that with the presence of another sort of permanent housing solution, those people who absolutely may have needed support, a permanent supportive housing unit, the supportive services really, are more willing to move on if they have, their health has gotten better, they've gotten their mental health services together, all of those different things. So that's actually been a great test case all across the country, because we are seeing successes in people if you can offer them another permanent housing solution, how you can move them along and free up space for people that we know are still coming through the system that may be unhoused or in shelter, and moving them into a permanent supportive housing and keeping that going. So I just wanted to mention that because we are seeing some success there with the utilization of emergency housing vouchers through the public housing authorities.
I'm going to stop sharing, and David is going to start sharing. He'll give us a second to swap.
So any questions so far about anything? Again, always going to do a temperature check.
Councilor Hall, you want to ask a question now, or?
I'm just trying to see, I would prefer to get through the entire presentation before I hop on. Yeah.
Cool things. We really just had this slide and maybe another one, but I think questions might be a little bit useful to go through, and we do know that want to be conscious of time. So, just really quickly, and we talked about this already. So we talked about sort of structure, and we want to go a little bit more in depth about that. Who needs to be at the table? What kind of structure should be implemented? Is it one central committee made up of, the city, the COC, the PHA, a few representatives from each of those places that meets maybe twice a year, and then staff members from each of those places that actually works on maybe 1, 2, or 3, or all 5 of those first year potential goals that we set out, or strategies that we set out. And then, maybe is it a committee structure? Is it everyone talking about every topic? Maybe not the most efficient use of time. And how do you roll it out, right? Do you stagger them throughout the quarters, as Julie stated? And landlord engagement may be really easy. Or there is momentum as far as SROs, but it may take a little bit of time to get those online. So pause the SRO conversation for now and focus on some of the others. So with sort of you all knowing more about what's happening on the ground there in terms of what can come online, what resources you have, and who may or may not be available from each of the agencies or from the different cities involved, then that's just how you create that rollout and that structure. but there needs to be a structure, right? And we just wanted to talk about that vaguely to really get you all to sort of start thinking about it. And I think, Julie, that's really, did you have anything else to add, Julie, about this? Okay. I think we should go to questions now.
All right, Councilor Hall.
All right. I feel like I've been waiting for 2.5 years to get to this conversation.
That
So,
makes us happy that we're here.
yes,
I know it's not great that it took 2 years, but
So-
it makes us happy.
And
First
if you could just say your name and identify, because we can't see, all we can see is Lisa, so
Okay.
we hope, yeah.
so I am Lee Hall, council member representing Ward 4, Core Norman, where a lot of existing services that we have are in Core Norman. And because of that, I have deeply immersed myself in this topic for since I've been in council, so in September 2019. So first of all, I want to thank the work of the Homebase folks. I have followed this very closely every step of the way. I think it was absolutely a great investment that we made to do this work and to have an outside entity with a national reputation be able to come into our community and take a look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and ending up with a product like this that is actually something that we can work with going forward. The other thing I want to do, because we have people here who, this has been your life work to address these issues. And that has not gone unrecognized by our community. So I want to thank all of you for, I think we see a lot of people that are on the continuum of care team that have worked on this for years. Way before I got here, you'll be doing it way after I'm out the door. So I want to thank you on behalf of our community for the work that you've invested and the heart and soul that you've invested in this work. And we've been at it for a long time. And that's really important for our community to understand. This is not new. None of this is new. Okay, here's my glass. It's half full. I am committed to keep looking at this problem through a half full glass. So, these are not questions, these are just statements. I actually believe we are already in year 1 of our implementation plan, and we can start with shelter. Because we've recognized the need for a low barrier shelter in our community, when other people could not do it anymore for a variety of reasons, the city of Norman stepped up and has provided a low barrier, no barrier shelter since December of 2019. The first year we were only able to do it for 3 months, but because of the support of the community and our council, we have operated a low barrier shelter now since December of 2020. We have it funded to August of 2022. So I think the commitment is there. I think that as a municipality, we're recognizing that we may not be the best people to run the shelter, but we have definitely recognized that need that is currently being done. We are being able to address a lot of the things that you spoke about. That is already happening in our community. This is not anything that we have to start up. We just have to figure out how to keep it going. And we need to figure out how to keep it funded beyond August of 22. And we have to figure out from our extensive community partners of how we're going to run it in the future. But check, already doing that. It's just how do we keep it going. The second thing, the landlord engagement piece, I feel like we've already started on that too. We were lucky enough to have a very committed employee for a short period of time, but we found grant money for someone to be a housing navigator. Those conversations have been ongoing for years, but we finally had somebody on the city side that could devote their full-time work to that. I think there's discussions about how we're going to transition that type of position to another agency, another entity. I think that's appropriate to transfer it to an entity that's more capable of getting good results. And so if we can help with that, I'm fully supportive of that. The other thing that's really interesting about this landlord engagement piece is I cannot tell you how many people have reached out to me, and I'm sure other council members, just in the last 6 to 8 weeks about this landlord engagement piece. And I think that's a result of the work that Homebase has been doing. I think it's a result of the surveys that went out. I think it's a result of people within our community as this topic has been elevated, not always in a positive way, but the fact that it has been elevated to a community conversation. We have people like the Chamber of Commerce that are trying to figure out the role that they can play. And this is definitely a lane that they can play in. I was contacted by leadership within Norman Next, the younger version that works out under the Chamber umbrella, and they're really looking to engage on this and understand that there is a lack of affordable housing, that we really need to have a robust reset of outreach to landlords, those who have participated in the past, people that have never considered offering temporary housing, affordable housing. And these are two, entities that are ready to engage in that conversation. So I think we have the beginnings of a structure there. I've had people who are community health workers in Oklahoma County and Cleveland County that have also reached out. How can we help? How can we get engaged in this? So I think we've had lots of work done in this area over the years, but I think we have an awesome opportunity right now to expand it to the larger community. So that work is already underway. When we talk about the SRO piece, we're already talking about that. And we've talked about it. That's been a conversation that has come and gone for years, I think, right?
Yeah.
But we're currently exploring that. We're exploring a property that the city might possibly be able to invest in. And again, we need help from the larger community of who is going to be the most qualified to come in and do that. And an SRO concept is a place where you do get more wraparound services. So that's already in the works and being considered. So check there. Provide optional wraparound services. There are so many positive things happening, I think, in addition to what all of you are already doing every single day. So this is not new either. But I think we are recognizing our gaps. We are recognizing that we need transportation fixes. We are anxiously awaiting to see how the 988 piece is going to roll out with that support for behavioral and mental health services. So, those are moving parts that we don't exactly know the answer to. We have a new nonprofit agency that is being born right in front of our eyes called Caravan. And they are challenged right now to figure out how can they meet these needs. They definitely can meet the transportation needs of getting our homeless friends from one place to another, to doctor's appointments, to getting that door-to-door support so that they are successful in keeping appointments or getting documents or that kind of thing. It's a work in progress, but we have a new entity being born to address that in a broader way. So I think that's a really, really positive thing too. Street outreach, I know. Yes?
I was going to ask if you could repeat the name of the new organization.
It's called Caravan, CARE-A-VAN. And they are in the process right now of becoming a 501c3 organization, but definitely recognizing the gaps in service that you've identified with transportation and with more robust street outreach. I think we've had pretty good street outreach in the past that kind of got really disrupted during the pandemic for all kinds of reasons. And I think, it's another great opportunity to reset there and to have that coordination that you're talking about and, bringing in new faces and new energy of other people that might have some expertise or be able to support the kind of street outreach that was fairly robust in the past, and it's just something that we have to rebuild now, and I think a lot of that is pandemic related and resource related. So to me, this is a great working document. I mean, there are so many pieces of this that I think we're already addressing. I think the critical questions for us as a municipality is, what is the role going to be? I feel fairly confident that the city of Norman is not, the role may be changing, but the commitment to be a partner in reducing homelessness in our community is there, and I think it's there in very demonstrable ways. So the question of who the collaborative applicant is, what the role of the city is, who needs to be at the table representing the city, those kinds of things, those are all things to get worked out. But I see the shift that we're making. I've recognized for years that our need for affordable housing is so overwhelming, it's hard to even know how to take a bite out of it. But we are in a position to take a bite. And I think we're committed as a council and as a city to help with that too. So I think I see our role is changing, but we are really at a transformational point in a lot of ways. And so there is nothing about how we got here that doesn't energize me on how we move forward, because I think we have so many pieces that are in place. And so I think the critical question now is, like I said, we're already taking action steps in every one of these 5 areas. The one thing I'm the least familiar with is the moving on policy. So if you can address.
We're good.
Okay.
So, the Housing Authority kind of has an informal one currently, and the discussion has been on how to formalize that.
So again, we have the backbone. We have the backbone of all of this. It's just how to fine-tune what is the role of us as a municipality going to be. I'm really intrigued about, from the very beginning, we have a Cleveland County continuum of care, and it has been that way since 1995. Am I right?
About then,
roughly.
Yep.
And your recommendation that we get the city of Moore, the city of Noble, into the conversation, definitely. I know Cleveland County has a role, but I think that we're probably at a crossroads there of how that looks like moving forward as a more comprehensive plan. So I'm just so positive of the investment that we've made as a community already. And this is just an opportunity for us to really take it to the next level. And I think, there's already plenty of, again, backbone of communication. The continuum of care has operated for many, many years, establishing leadership and these committees and just literally following this action plan, I think is completely doable.
Thank you. Councilmember Holman.
Just add on to that too, that Councilman Foreman even mentioned it, that a large part of South Oklahoma City is in Cleveland County also. And I don't know if a lot of folks understand how much of South OKC is in Cleveland County, and it's significant. So that's another area too. And then I'm not sure what goes on down in Lexington. And I know they're a pretty small town, but I assume they might have some issues, especially since they have a prison down there. I don't know what type of situation that creates for them. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was the landlord risk mitigation program. I've seen multiple people comment on the Norman community page about, I've got a job, I've got funds, but nobody will rent to me. I cannot find a place that will rent out to me. And that's one of the biggest issues, is we have a lot of people that don't have any mental health issues, they don't have employment problems. They may not make a whole lot of money, but they make enough, they're responsible, but they're unable to get housing because there isn't any available, or they're 2 and 3 bedrooms and they need a 1 bedroom. So those are a lot of barriers I've seen to people that are trying to stay, keep from being homeless. And that's one of the biggest challenges I think a lot of cities have, is we do have to focus on a lot of the folks that are on the street, but we also how can we keep people from ending up there in the first place, especially given how much we know it costs community as a whole when we do have someone living on the street. But I can also understand that a lot of landlords may feel apprehensive about, not all rental property owners are wealthy people themselves. Some of them inherited the property, they don't have a lot of money, and so it could be scary for them to say, if I rent out to this person and they don't pay their rent, how am I going to pay the property tax or whatever it may be on the house? So some sort of program that could help give them some certainty that, yeah, I'm willing to do this, I just need some backup, basically. So I'm really interested in exploring that further for sure, because I do think we have landlords in Norman that are willing to do that that are already doing it, but we need more of them to do it, and maybe they would be if we had something like that. And it doesn't have to be a ton of money. In many cases, as I mentioned, it might not even hardly be used, but just it being there can make a big difference. So, and then the one bedroom thing is a big deal. A lot of the almost all new apartments that are built are at least 2 or 3 bedroom, and for a lot of folks, you don't need a second bedroom, and you can't afford. A second bedroom can be several $100s more. So looking at ways to kind of expand that or encourage that or incentivize that type of thing, I think is worthy as well. And then, the reducing the barriers. People, like we talked about rules and what type of rules. We want rules for safety, but at what point do some of those rules prevent people from getting the help they need to stay off the street? And so I think that's really important too. And then I just wanted to mention as well, because he was someone that we all might recognize, but we know someone in Norman that does live on the street did pass away last week, David Allen. I see him pretty much every single morning, so he had been in that situation for a long time in Norman. He has some mental health issues that prevent or create a barrier for him to maintain long-term housing on his own. And, there's many individuals in our community like that. And David's just one of the more prominent ones that I've gotten to know over the years and see all the time. But just want us all to remember that we have real people that are, some of which cannot, there's nothing they can do about it. And they need us to, all of us, our community, to come together and do what we can to get them out of that situation. So I agree with Councilor Hall. I feel very good about my support of this. I think having this type of detailed roadmap can prevent us from spinning our wheels or spending resources and time on things that may not work or we don't know anything about. And I feel like this can give us a real focus in making the best use of our limited resources and our time that our community has.
Thank you. Councilor Schuler.
Lauren Schuler, Ward 2. I'll keep this short. I think what we have in front of us, I think, is pretty fantastic. And just to kind of piggyback off what Councilmember Hall and Holman have said, just that it's really exciting. We're doing a lot of things already, but the one thing that I don't see, and this is not, Homebase's project, it's really our project to figure out what kind of money we're going to attach to all of these types of projects. And as we just had a budget, I know it was capital, but we need to start thinking about how much money we're going to be appropriating potentially in the next fiscal year for programs, and how much money the city is going to start putting forward. And so I'm just, thinking how much money would we put into a landlord mitigation fund, and what are figures that would be reasonable and actionable for us to do that, to start implementing those types of things.
Councilmember Schuler, one of the things that Homebase mentioned that I think Lisa has shared, ARPA home dollars, and we'll be bringing you some details on that allocation. And staff did submit a $5 million request to state ARPA funding for a permanent no barrier, low barrier shelter. So we've got several hooks in the water, and we're working mightily on several fronts. And I think this is just such a rare alignment of the stars in that the things we are hearing and seeing in the Homebase presentation, music to our ears. These are things that we've been scratching at. Now we've got them assembled and accumulated, and we have a roadmap that staff will become intimately familiar with, along with those community continuum of care partners. And we intend to be bringing you some action items here in the very near future that go immediately towards that year one list of accomplishable goals. We too feel those are very accomplishable. And typically when we're in this set of circumstances, the biggest challenge we have is how are we going to pay for these things? And I don't think that's our biggest challenge at this point in history, which is just such a rare moment. So absolutely looking forward to being able to move forward.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilor
Yeah,
Pico.
that's actually all a great segue into what I wanted to mention. It's just the $5 million that we've already earmarked for affordable housing. What if we were able to take a portion of that money to start this risk mitigation fund? So instead of building $5 million in affordable housing, we've now just opened up a bunch of stuff that's already created, already built.
And we think ARPA could also be a source for that fund.
Okay.
And we'll talk with the Homebase folks about best practices. And I don't think we're talking millions. I think we're talking thousands
That's exactly what I'm thinking,
in this
yeah.
fund available, but a letter to go out with the potential renter to say, hand this to the landlord. It says in the event there's damage to the unit. And those are there's a program that would go along with that. Like how do we ensure we're just not, writing checks for damage, but an inspection before and an inspection after the tenant and those types of things.
Absolutely.
But we think that may be achievable with funds we've already got access to.
Thanks, sir.
Councilor Hall.
I had a question for Ms. Craig. Do we have any kind of incentives right now for landlord
With the,
engagement?
and Lynn, you might help me out here. I think with the ESG CV funds, with those funds, that there are some landlord incentives that are available.
With the COVID money that was awarded, there were specific landlord incentives that we could give out, none of which were mitigation, but they were incentives to get them to rent, like a second deposit fee or a last month with the initial first month, which earlier they wouldn't allow you to do, but because of the COVID funds, they allowed you to do that waiver. And then also if there were maintenance or cleaning fees that needed to be done, either to the unit in order to get it ready, or after the person moved out, we were able to use those funds for that.
So, yeah, that to me just seems like a really high priority area to figure that out. To what, with existing stock, and then what else we can be investing in.
Councilor Lynn.
So I thank Homebase for their time and putting together this and this presentation. And I do not question anybody's heart on this issue and how you're wanting to help people, but you also have to bring in the negative consequences of these actions and what we've been experiencing. When this was voted down by the majority of voters back then, it has gotten exponentially worse, and it's just not good. I mean, look at all the people downtown and their businesses and how they feel inundated by this since that shelter's gone down there, and we have to deal with that. Put one of these that's 24/7 low barrier. If you're not willing to put that right behind your house where you live now, you should vote to put it behind somebody else's house. All the negative connotations that come with it, the crime. 1 in 5, almost 1 in 5 of our registered sex offenders in Norman are listed as homeless, just roaming around. Lots of crime. Crime has gone way up. The drug use. It's not just helping people out. If you build something like this, more people are going to come. It's going to expand the problem. It's going to make it worse. I understand wanting to help people, but just throwing up things, people did not move to Norman to have projects and ghettos built around them. They don't want that. The majority of people don't want that, and it's gotten so much worse. It has taken resources from our police. It is driving people insane. I appreciate the work that Food and Shelter does, but those people that live over by Food and Shelter feel like prisoners in their own home and hate living there. What are they going to do? They can't sell their houses. Who wants to live by them? So when you think about this, and you're trying to help out what supposedly is a small amount of people in Norman, think of all the people that you're hurting by bringing more, creating more. It's just a different perspective, and I think that the majority of the people in Norman probably agree with that, especially after the murder and everything that has gone on lately. I do not think that the public supports this. Of course, everybody wants to help, but what do you create by the way you go about it? I think it puts us in a worse position. I mean, you're talking about spending millions of dollars. We've had a head count of what, 200 something people, and you want to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on 200 people. I think it's probably way worse than that, but the more that you bring here and give out more services, the more people that come here. It has not helped anywhere that more they increase services, it's increased the problem and the population of homeless. Just have to be realistic about that.
Thank you for sharing that. An excellent argument of why we're very lucky to have a plan moving forward. Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, I mean, if 1 in 5 homeless people are sexual predators, that would mean 4 out of 5 people with homes are sexual predators, right? So, I mean, to me, without the current overnight shelter, there would be 30 people sleeping on the sidewalk in front of businesses every night downtown, instead of in that shelter. And if we don't have one at all, those people aren't going to go away. They're just going to go back to what they were doing before, which is sleeping on the sidewalk in front of businesses like they did before. And before we had this overnight shelter, we had 2 homeless people freeze to death on the sidewalk in downtown Norman. And that made the news, and I can assure you, that did not make the city of Norman look very good. Talk about a homicide, a single homicide happening that could have happened anywhere. To me, 2 homeless people freezing to death on the sidewalk in a city of this wealth is way worse of an image than a single homicide. And so, I agree with that nobody wants these types of services around their property. There's no good place to put these types of things. A lot of these services, though, have existed in this area as long as the city of Norman has. I mean, East Main Place was using buildings that were part of the old Griffin Hospital, which is opened in the 1800s. And that's part of the reason I supported years ago the vote for the new food and shelter for Friends, is because I didn't view it as though we were putting a service in that neighborhood that wasn't already there. I viewed it as that neighborhood has been next to a mental health facility for 100 years. It's right next to the Cleveland County Health Department. It's right next to Leland Wolf School. I don't think it's called that anymore, but Child and Family Services, all those types of things have been over there, and many of those are state agencies, county, and nonprofits. They're not the city of Norman. We don't really, I would say our nonprofits and these other agencies do a lot. We add some funding, we add staff support, things like that, but a lot of the services aren't provided by us. And to me, I feel like the presentation we got a few weeks ago that Mr. Richard McCown gave us seemed like a pretty good idea worth pursuing, in the fact that providing housing and a facility that isn't next to a neighborhood. You got Bishop Creek here, and then you got Health Department and all these other things, and then 12th Avenue, and then a neighborhood. So having it there on that site where it's not near anybody's houses, but it's still located in a place where the people that need it can easily get to it. Because we could put a shelter in Ward 5 by the lake, but how are they going to get there? Or if we put it on the 10-mile flat on the far west side, how would anybody use that shelter? That's not where that population is. And so it's kind of to me, not doing anything isn't going to make the problem go away. And based on my experience, not having the current shelter we do have, again, just meant that more people, at least 30 people, right now we have 15 to 30 people stay at that shelter now. So if that wasn't being provided by the city, it wouldn't be provided by anybody else. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. If somebody else was doing it, the city wouldn't be doing it. We're the last resort. And so I feel, I mean, those 15 to 30 people would be sleeping right in front of all those businesses on Main Street. They'd be waking up. Those businesses, they'd come there and open their business, and those people would be there, just like they were before when I worked downtown on Main Street for a couple of years. And so I get concerns some folks have, but I just don't think not doing anything. And I would note too that, you know, we talked about tonight, we need to remodel the police department. Well, that was one of the ballot initiatives that failed too. I still think we need to do it. It's in bad shape. They've got security issues that they need with their parking lot and lighting and all that stuff. But the voters did say no to remodeling the police station as part of ballot initiative 3. And so should we just not do it? And that one failed by the most of all of them. And so I think it just because it had the word municipal in it, people didn't, you know, so. But I don't necessarily think that like that. I don't think Norman voters didn't want us to make improvements to that building at all. Maybe they just didn't like that plan or that particular time or whatever it may have been. But I think we need to do that project, and I think we need to pursue these because I don't think it's not going to get any better if we do nothing. And I get that we have been doing stuff and it hasn't necessarily improved necessarily over the past couple of years, but I think there's a lot of factors involved with that, and COVID being the biggest one, the economy, a lot of folks, I mean, there's record profits, there's record sales tax collection, all those types of things going on in this country. But a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people lost their housing, and it's been a real struggle for a lot of those folks to get, you know, a handle back on. So I don't think we need to do nothing and just, you know, kind of hope that it goes away.
And Councilmember Holland, to that point, I think where we are at this point in history, we are much more cognizant of the impacts and the required mitigation of any action we take, and I think more so than we have ever been in the past. And I think at the forefront of these conversations about where should this facility go, that's the first part of our conversation now, where in years past I don't think it was necessarily part of the conversation. And it's just because patterns of behavior have changed. When we had the first warming shelter right next to City Hall, we really didn't experience any issues, and it was in our backyard, and we were out of here at 5:30, no problems, and here at 7:30 in the morning and no problems, and it is different. And we are adjusting and maneuvering to account for those issues that do require mitigation and working on mitigation measures to the current situation that's before us. So I appreciate this conversation because we are now much more focused on those impacts than we may have ever been in the past.
Councilmember Foreman.
So I'm going to act like Councilmember Holman didn't say what I wanted to say, but I think we need to retire the argument that it got voted down because public safety improvements also got voted down. So the same argument could be made that the public doesn't care about public safety, and that's absolutely not true. The timing was just terrible. However, I don't think anybody likes where our warming shelter is now. It's in the middle of our business district. It's in a terrible location. Moving forward, we would not choose that again or anything similar to that. But we have to remember this is a county, hopefully county collaborative project, and Cleveland County is a very large area. So moving forward, I do think that we're going to be more intentional on where we do this, and this is a long-term commitment, and so we're just not going to go to the first place available like where we are this year. So we need to keep that in mind as we move forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Schuler.
Yeah, and I think I would also like to talk about the fact that this conversation gets centered on a shelter because of the critical need that we have seen in our community. But I think that what this, I guess our plan, our strategic plan moving forward really encompasses is that a lot of the things that we can do to mitigate homelessness is also helping so many people that are on the fringes of potentially falling into homelessness. And so the things like affordable housing, single room occupancy, landlord engagement, all of those things don't just help people that are currently experiencing homelessness, but help people that, are low income or, are losing potentially jobs. And if we haven't seen what has happened with the pandemic, that we have so many people that are right there on the edge. If they lose one paycheck, they could fall into that gap and lose their housing. And so I think that we are not only focusing on 200 people, we're also focusing on a larger swath of Norman than just people currently experiencing homelessness. And I think that gets lost in the conversation a lot. And so let's widen our scope and think about more of our community when we're really talking about these issues.
Agreed. Yes, speaker.
I just wanted to add a little bit of sort of best practice experience about a low barrier warming shelter. And oftentimes, if you have a low barrier shelter, people who would otherwise not want to go to a shelter are willing to come in. And what we've seen in communities that we worked in is that sometimes there are people who are coming in who have never touched the homeless system of care before. And what that means is they become a captive audience in a very meaningful way, in that they get access to supportive services and some of the things that they're not taking care of when they're on the street. By having them even come to the shelter, not only are they sheltered, but you're building that relationship to be able to help address some of those mental health issues, substance use issues. And so by leaving them outside and not creating that environment, you're missing out on that opportunity to actually help build that trust and provide them those supportive services. So it has a twofold benefit, and as I'm hearing you all have this conversation, just trying to remind ourselves that that is one of the aspects, and you don't always get that in all shelters, but particularly these low barrier warming shelters that have evolved and become more year round, that's an opportunity that often doesn't exist in a community to bring down the number of people who are homeless ongoing. Because once that momentum happens and the community knows that exists, then you don't get people staying outside the shelter for very long. They know there's a place to go, and so before things get really bad, they get the interventions that are needed. And so the potential for reducing homelessness increases when you have a low barrier shelter with housing focused services.
Okay, so we have two more comments. I know, let's try and. Okay, Councilmember Hall.
Make it quick. So one of the first action steps on page 4 that I wanted to make sure we also brought up, because we are currently working towards this, is the housing market analysis and affordability study. So that is another recommendation, an action step that is already currently underway, that is actually intended to be a companion to this work. So
It is funded, and the RFP is under development. Hopefully soon we can get it out. So.
And also, just to say publicly that we've been very intentional about trying to relocate the emergency shelter sooner than later. That's a little bit more of a challenge than just being able to snap your fingers or wave the magic wand, but we recognize literally the emergency nature of how we've operated the shelter since 2019. The first year we had a location that worked out great and struggled for funding, and thanks to our police department, they provided that funding for that first year. I think we should say thank you about that. And this year we were fortunate enough to have the funding stream, but really, really struggled with the location. So we recognize that it wasn't ideal, that we do need to find a better location, and we are actively working on that. And the other thing I was going to just mention, as we think about next steps and the leadership and the implementation structure. So we have this continuum of care structure that I think we really need to refocus on what the strengths are there, and recognize that we have 30 to 40 agencies that are already active participants, but we also have a lot of new players and a lot of voices that are actively advocating on behalf of our homeless population and also trying to prevent those that are one step away from finding themselves homeless for the very first time. And so I think, again, we have that backbone and that structure, and however we can bring more people into that team or how we do this implementation plan, I think a lot of it's going to be up to the continuum of care. I think we have just an incredible opportunity to really address the data sharing plan too, because we have a lot of people doing informal street outreach, but where it falls apart is we're not collecting the data. The left hand and the right hand aren't always talking to one another, and I think again we have a wonderful opportunity to make that more robust and connect a lot of the people that are doing the work out there, not just our nonprofit agency.
I agree. Councilman Bowman?
Just mention that there may be more work being done by others than I know, but I often feel like in Cleveland County, Norman is always having to take on the load of addressing this type of issue and many others. I have seen unhoused people in Noble. I've seen them in Moore. A lot of them in Moore, especially on the north side of Moore where it runs into Oklahoma City. And there seems to be a perception that this issue only exists in Cleveland County in Norman, but that's not true. But I often feel like we're the ones that are...
The only ones doing anything?
Yes. And like the other cities don't want to... Either they have the attitude of, well, if we just look the other way, then they'll go to Norman or they'll go to Oklahoma City, or we just don't even have to think about it. And maybe Noble feels like we're a small town, we don't have any resources or things like that. But I do hope that we can, and Lisa may have a different perspective than I do about how the county collaborates, but I would like to really see an effort amongst all the communities in Cleveland County, including Oklahoma City, just because of how much. But Norman, we make up half of the county's population just about, so it's, it's significant, and I think if Norman and Moore and Noble and South OKC can get together on this issue, we could, all of us together, there could be housing options that, if we're just saying, well, there's not enough one-bedrooms in Norman. Maybe there's some in Moore, maybe there's more in South OKC, or maybe Noble will have some. And those types of things.
So that's an excellent point. To be fair to our colleagues in Noble and Lexington and Moore and South Oklahoma City, they may be doing things that we just don't know about, which is part of the problem.
Yeah.
So, no shade thrown to our neighbors, but looking forward to collaborating with them and addressing a very important issue together. So, City Manager, some notes that I've taken on ways to move forward. I think, as Councilor Hall outlined, we have already made progress on some of this to the point I think we can count year one as January 1, 2022 and build off from that. I do like the idea of setting up ad hoc committees to address certain issues. I labeled landlord engagement, homeless outreach, but also public education. There could be more, but that was just a few that I had, and I think if we can keep it to no more than 4 and model it how we do with council committees where it's Thursday at 4, that would be easier for staff to manage it, where it's Wednesdays at 3. We know that this, some committee with part of this, strategic plan is meeting, I think will be manageable. We obviously would like to get an estimate and also see models of both landlord incentive and risk mitigation fund. So that would be a great topic for perhaps oversight to look at. And then we definitely need to bring everyone and cities to the table. So perhaps some sort of initial, almost like a meet and greet, where you just come and this is what we're talking about, here's our plan, what do you think, answer some questions, and just really officially open the door to creating a county-wide approach. And obviously making sure our partners at the county are involved as well. I know that Commissioner Stacy has shared with me personally his desire to see us have a more robust data collection system, which is one of the first 5 items. So, great discussion tonight. I'm excited to have this. I think it is the roadmap that we need to be successful. We know that we're already making progress, and let's continue it.
And I just want to throw out that the executive board for the continuum of care also needs to be part of all of this.
Oh, certainly, and
That's
I
where the
think
expertise lies.
mentioning the continuum of care, that is where the expertise lies. I think if we were ever gonna make a shift and try it from a different perspective with the different roles, this is the time. So I know it felt uncomfortable and scary to maybe step down, maybe lose some staff, but honestly, this is as much of a clean slate as you can possibly get. So I think it's time to approach the problem with fresh eyes, and we have just the opportunity to do that, and we've got federal dollars to help us pay for it. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Julie, David, Carolyn, I'll check in with you guys tomorrow. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.